We start all of our events with a land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat. We offer our gratitude to the First Nations for their care for and teachings about our earth and relations. May we honor those teachings. We are very pleased tonight to have Randy Bagg of the Ontario Barn Preservation Nonprofit Group as our speaker. But before I introduce him, there are some Zoom keeping details to review. Our administrative assistant, who I think you can see on the screen here, Janice Rector, is our Zoom mistress. She's going to be recording the event. She's already started so that it can be posted on the Foundation's YouTube channel. Jan is going to mute everyone on the call so that we do not interrupt Randy's talk. You can have your video on or off and you'll still see slides that Randy will be presenting. We'd like to hold the questions to the end or add your questions in the chat function. If you'd like to make a comment at the end, go to the bottom of your screen and you will see a raise hand function. You'll need to unmute yourself to ask your question, and then we ask you to mute yourself again so that this will reduce the background noise on the recording. After the questions, Christine Hebert, our secretary, will thank our speaker. Now, having done the whole Zoom review, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Randy Bagg. Randy, who we've been chatting with already, is a representative of the Ontario Barn Preservation Group, and he's recently moved to the Kingston area. He has a strong background in agriculture, having worked as a large animal veterinarian during his career. Welcome, Randy, and welcome to Kingston. We're very pleased to have you tonight. So can we get your PowerPoint up, Randy?
I'm gonna try here.
Fingers crossed, everybody.
How's that?
Lovely.
Get it on the, there, can everybody see that okay?
That's perfect.
Okay. Well, good evening and hello to everybody. First, I want to thank Shirley and the Frontenac Heritage Foundation for inviting me to speak tonight about saving Eastern Ontario barns. I'm going to admit up front that I'm not a barn architecture or repair expert or even a heritage expert. However, I have spent my life working in barns, and I do have a passion for saving them. And I believe that not only do barns have unique architectural significance, but they also hold the stories of rural families that made a livelihood working in those barns. And I think that is really what makes barns special, and it's why I joined the Ontario Barn Preservation. So this is the agenda that I would like to cover tonight. First, I want to talk about Ontario Barn Preservation. What is it? Who's involved? What are they trying to do? And then secondly, I'm going to talk about who am I and how did I end up here, a large animal veterinarian, end up here talking about saving barns. And then I'm going to present some facts about old barns that I think makes them interesting and worth saving. And then finally, I'm going to talk about a project called Your Old Barn Study, in which the Ontario Barn Preservation is attempting to do a census of barns in Ontario and gather information on them to help preserve them digitally. So start by talking about Ontario Barn Preservation, and I'll use the acronym OBP going forward. OBP began in 2018 when a group of people, all with a passion for old barns, got together and decided that they needed to form an organization which would advocate for saving barns. And so the OBP was founded in 2019 as a volunteer-run, not-for-profit organization, which is governed by a board of directors, and I'm one of the directors now. We also have about 10 regional representatives covering the counties across Ontario, and these regional representatives are the contact points for barn owners with the OBP. The vision of the OBP, I think, is fairly simple, but it's their dedication to saving Ontario barns, which includes their unique architecture, their contribution to our rural history in Ontario, and their contribution to our rural landscape. And so it's important, though, I think, to define what we mean by preservation. And OBP uses that term preservation broadly, meaning that there's different ways to preserve barns. And the most obvious and preferred method is the physical preservation of the actual barn. However, we realize that that is not always practical or possible for all barns. So we also use preservation to include a digital format where the barn may be already torn down or is in risk of coming down in the very near future. And we want to record as many details of those barns as possible for future reference. So this slide lists the objectives of the Ontario Barn Preservation. And the first objective is sharing knowledge. And we've developed resources for barn owners that assist them in preserving, renovating, or repurposing their barns. The OBP website has a wealth of information on barns. We have a barn specialist on the OBP website that lists contractors, engineers, consultants, suppliers, all with particular expertise in barns to help people get their barns repaired or restored. And every month we post blogs on our website that include technical issues for assessing and repairing barns. Second, the OBP encourages barn enthusiasts to network and exchange information through different forums. We have a Google Groups chat forum for members to submit questions about barns and get input from other members. We've just initiated a bi-monthly Zoom chat called Tenant Talks for members to bring barn pictures and details to share and initiate discussions about barns. And we're planning some barn tours in Ontario for the coming summer, and I think it would be great to see one happen in Eastern Ontario if we could make that happen. And we also have a social media presence. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. The third objective, and this is the one that I have been most involved in, is that we launched last year Your Old Barn Study, and this is to create a digital directory or census of barns in Ontario. And we hope that this database is going to provide valuable research data on barns. And I'll talk more about the details of Your Old Barn Study at the end of the presentation. Fourthly, we're involved in trying to understand and influence government policies and legal processes to help preserve barns. And we're starting to engage with not only the Ontario government, but with municipal governments as well as other stakeholders, including heritage associations such as yourselves. And finally, OBP is beginning to explore some opportunities to access funding for barn preservation projects. And this is probably aspirational at this time. However, we see barn associations in the US that have accessed funding for barn renovations from private donations and from fundraising. So that's something that we would really like to be able to do in the future. So now I'll talk a little bit about myself and how I ended up as part of OBP and talking to you tonight. So I grew up on a Jersey farm just north of Toronto, near Maple, Ontario. And for anybody that's been to Canada's Wonderland, that's close to where my ancestors' barns stood. However, I'm really sad to say that my father's, my uncle's, my grandfather's barns have all been long gone to the urban expansion of Toronto. I threw in a couple of pictures here. So the picture on the left is my father and I on his new Massey Harris combine, and I think this picture was probably taken about 1957 or 1958. And my father and grandfather were both early adopters of agricultural innovation. And I think this was probably one of the first combines that came out, but it's a bit amusing to see it now compared to the combines that the farmers use now. We were lucky to probably do, 8 or 10 acres in a day. And now they probably do that in half an hour. And the other thing I thought, I kind of laughed when I saw it too. It has an umbrella. I don't know, I think everybody can see that, but the umbrella here, and I think of that compared to the air-conditioned cabs and everything that they have on tractors and combines nowadays. And that umbrella barely kept the sun off of us, and it sure didn't keep all the chaff and dirt that came off of the combine. So, and then the picture on the right's me and in front of my grandparents' farmhouse, and along with my favorite dog Roger, and looks like they were trying to put me to work. These are the photos of the barns that I grew up in. And so the upper left barn is my grandfather's farm. And it was, again, just north of Toronto. And it was at the intersection of Keele Street and Highway 7 for anybody that knows that area. And my grandfather purchased that farm in 1912, and he developed a very successful Jersey dairy herd there. The farm was sold in 1959 after my grandfather died, and it was sold to the CN, and they quickly developed that whole farm into a rail yards. And you can actually see that rail yard if you're going across the 407 now. You can see it on the north side just after Keele Street. The barn on the right is my father's first barn, where he farmed in the 1950s. And again, it was right across the road from my grandfather's barn. So the road there is Highway 7 again. And you can see Highway 7 back then was 2 lanes, 1 lane each way. And now it's I don't know how many lanes are on the 407, but it's probably at least half a dozen each way. And then Highway 7 actually still runs there too, and a lot of traffic there. And the first barn, the barn on the right, it was all developed into factories, and so it's been gone for probably 50 years. The barn on the lower left is the barn that I remember the most. That's the barn and farm where my father owned from about 1960 into the 1970s. It was a little further. It was up Jane Street, about 3-4 kilometers north of Wonderland, and we sold it in the 1970s, and it's even been developed now into an industrial park. So it's for me, it's pretty. I feel like there's a part of me that's gone when I see all these pictures of these barns that I knew so well, and there's nothing left of them whatsoever. So, I went to the University of Guelph back in the 1970s, and I graduated with a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree in 1979. And then I spent 15 years in large animal veterinary practice north of Brampton in Peel County, and I practiced mainly on dairy cows, but I did beef cattle, horses, sheep, goats. But again, I saw the negative impact of urban sprawl on farms and barns. And there was developers and speculators moving into that area as Brampton and Mississauga were beginning to really expand, and barns were being left derelict and being torn down. I left veterinary practice in 1994, and I went and worked for an animal health pharmaceutical company for the next 24 years, doing clinical research and technical outreach to veterinarians and farmers across the province. And so I got to spend more time in dairy and beef barns doing that. I retired in 2018. And because I'd always had a passion for history, I enrolled part-time at the University of Guelph in an honors history Bachelor of Arts program, and I managed to graduate in 2022. And I should mention the best part of going back as a senior is that I didn't have to pay any tuition. So that was a bonus. But one of the courses I took during my studies in doing that history degree was an experiential course sponsored by the Ontario Barn Preservation with the goal of developing a survey or census of barns in Ontario. And that really ignited my passion for barns. And when I was done that course, I continued to work on the survey, which we finished last year and rolled out as Your Old Barn Study. And I just threw in a couple of pictures to prove that I did do some veterinary work at one time. And the barn in the middle there was one of my favorite barns that I went to, just north of Brampton. And it actually, I think, only came down within probably the last 5 years, which is pretty remarkable for that area. But it was a beautiful, beautiful barn. And there was actually horses in there, standardbreds and Hackney ponies that I worked on. So now move on, and I'd like to talk about old barns and I think what makes them interesting and important. And so first of all, I'm going to define what we mean by an old barn. Then I'll talk about some of the common types of barns, and then some clues that might help you determine how old your barn is. Then the challenges that are facing old barns, and obviously there are many and critical. And then I think an important question too is, why do we want to save old barns? What is it about them that makes them worth wanting to preserve them and save them? So first, as far as the definition of an old barn, the Ontario Barn Preservation website has a definition of an old barn as a agricultural structure that was built before 1961. And that 1961 comes from a historical document called the Tweedsmuir History, which used 1961 as a threshold for determining an old barn. And what they argued was that after 1960, agricultural technology, and technology for barns tended to change significantly. And I think that's probably quite true. I think when you look at swine and poultry and dairy production, it became quite a bit more intensified after that time period of the early 60s. And so it required new housing for that kind of animal production. And so I think there is some merit in using that as a cutoff point, but I think that it is somewhat arbitrary. And I think when most people talk about old barns, we're really referring to barns that were built in the 1800s, probably up till the early 20th century. I would say like 1920 or to maybe 1930. The other definition that you'll see out there quite a bit is the heritage barn designation. And that's an old barn that has specific features that make it important from a local, regional, or national interest. And in Ontario, it's the Ontario Heritage Act, and there's designations for heritage that are part of that definition. And the structure it has to meet it, and that would be the same for a barn. So now I'd like to, go through what are different types of old barns, and for me at least, I think one of the most interesting aspects of barns is their variety. No two barns are exactly the same. Barns come in many shapes, sizes, colors, and additions to them. And so in the next few slides, I'm going to show you some pictures of the main types of barns that you're going to see in Ontario, but realizing that some of these terms do overlap. So I'll start with a heavy timber frame barn, which I think we were kind of talking about before the start here. I think that, it would be the most common construction method and materials for old barns. And so the vast majority of barns that were built up until the early 20th century would have been done with heavy timber frame. And so they typically have hand hewn structure, lumber, and you can see it in this picture. The we have the beams along here, and then we have posts. There's posts on the corner, so it's beams and posts, and they're put together. And then we have some braces, and that's what holds everything up. And one of the most important structures of a barn is what's called a bent. And I've put a picture here on the right of a bent. And so these are the cross-sectional, they go from side to side of the barn, structures of the barn that actually act like the skeleton that holds everything together. So again, these bents are made of posts and beams, and you can see in this picture there is one bent down at the end of the barn, and then we have another bent here. So they would be spaced out at regular intervals, usually through the length of the barn. Typically, there would be, I would say, anywhere from 4 to maybe 6 bents in a barn. And so I found that was one of the terms, all the years that I spent working in barns, I really had never heard that before, but the bent is a really important part of the structure of the barn. One special type of heavy timber frame barn is called a swing beam barn. And one of the OBP directors, he's actually written a book about swing beam barns, mainly in the Niagara Peninsula, but he goes across the province looking for them. And they're, again, a type of heavy timber frame, but in them, in those swing beam barns, they have a beam that goes from one side of the barn all the way across to the other side of the barn. And this one actually has a couple of them with a small post in between. And you can see this beam's a little thicker in the middle, and then it tapers where it inserts into the post. And the reason that they built these barns with the swing beam was that when they were bringing up a horse and wagon into the barn, so they would come up the barn bridge and in through the barn doors, and they would stop in the threshing floor and either unload or do threshing or whatever they were doing. But then they could actually take the team of horses underneath the swing beam and turn in the circle and go back out and down the barn bridge, out through the barn doors and down the barn bridge. So I don't know how many swing beam barns there would be in Eastern Ontario, but I imagine there are some. There's round barns in Ontario. I think across the whole province, I think there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 of them. And this is the picture, and here is one that's at the Milton Agricultural Heritage Park. It was actually moved there from it was previously on Steeles Avenue in Dufferin, again, just on the north side of Toronto, close to where my ancestors farm. And it's a bit unfortunate because the public really doesn't get into that park anymore. And so I don't think there's much, activity or to the barn, but it is still standing there. There's stone barns in Ontario. Obviously in locations where stones were plentiful. And so I lived in Guelph for a long time, and because we were close to the Niagara Escarpment, there was some pretty stony areas, and kind of south and and to the east of Guelph. And so there was a few stone barns in that area. And this one, I think, comes from that Guelph area as well. So, and then we have bank barns. Another term is for bank barns, and these were usually heavy timber frame construction, but they would have been built into the side of a hill or a grade in the land, and thus the farmer would have accessibility to both the stable and upper floor level where he could walk in or drive in into the upper level. The lower level was typically stone foundation, and it was used to house livestock. And then we have the upper level or mow area where they would store the feed. And you can see on this picture here that you can see where the foundation is a little higher on this side of the barn than it is on that side. And so the reason they built them like that was so that when they were bringing in horse and wagon, and then later with a tractor and wagon, there was less of an incline to go up the barn bridge to get into the upper part of the barn. And you can actually see the same thing in the picture in the stone barn, where it's pretty level actually going up into those little barn doors there. The original barns that at least many of the original barns that were built in Ontario were called log crib or ground barns. And these were typically would have been built up to about the 1850s. And so there wasn't a lower stable or upper mow that they would keep the livestock and the forages, the feed on the same level. And in this, I find this barn's interesting too, because it's got horizontal barn boards or cladding on it. And I don't know, coming from central Western Ontario, I really did not see very many barns that had horizontal barn boards, but I've noticed since I've moved to Kingston that I'm seeing a lot more of those kind of barns with that type of horizontal barn boards. And then the other type of barn is what's called a roof truss or kit barn. And so these would have started probably sometime after 1920. They're prefabricated. They're made with smaller 2x4s, 2x6s, 2x8s, and they came in pieces and then could be assembled and put together. And I actually realized when I saw this picture that that my uncle's had two barns, and the second barn was built in this construction. So it was a little different when we were trying to mow hay or straw into it. You didn't have all the posts and beams that tended to be in the way sometimes when you were doing that in the older type of barn. So just I have one slide on, just some tips on determining how old your barn is, because we do get people that ask that quite often. Obviously, the best evidence for how old your barn is if there's a record in the municipal office, but I don't think it was very routine back at least in the 19th century, to issue construction certificates for barns that were built then. So what there's a few things here that you can look at. The first one is the wood cut type. And there's an obvious difference between barn posts and beams that are hand hewn, such as on the left here, versus the ones that are sawn cut. The hand hewn timbers probably were throughout most of the 19th century. And then as we get into the 20th century, we would have seen the sawn lumber. Roof style is an indication of the age of a barn. By far the most common roof styles of barns in Ontario are what are called gambrel or gable roof styles. And um, older barns would typically have a gable roof, and you can see that here on the roof on the right. And these are simple pitched roofs, triangle pitched roofs, and they were simple to build. But once the farms grew a bit larger and had more livestock and they needed more feed, there was the invention of the hay track that would actually run across the peak of the barn for hay storage. There was a lot of the barn roof style changed more to a gambrel style. So you can see it's a two-pitched style. And so if you're seeing a gambrel roof, you're probably looking at a barn that was built towards the end of the 1800s, whereas the gables might be before. But you have to be a little bit careful because a lot of the gable roof barns were actually converted into gambrel roof barns at some point in time. Another indicator is nails, holding up the wooden siding on barns. The first barn boards would have been put up with square cut nails, and you can see that on the left of the nails at the bottom there, those would be the square cut nails, and they were used up until the late 1800s. And then, probably starting at around 1880, we get into manufactured spiral nails. And so they would have replaced those square nails. The other thing that you can look at is the foundation. Obviously, the barns without basements or ground barns tended to be pre-1850. But as livestock became more important in Ontario after 1850, we see barns built with stone foundations. And then when we get into the 20th century, somewhere around 1920, poured concrete replaced stone stable wall construction. So challenges facing old barns, and again, these are numerous and pretty challenging. Barns continue to disappear at alarming rates through urbanization, neglect, and obsolescence. I was actually out for a drive the other day with my wife coming from Napanee back into Kingston, and I probably saw, I don't know, half a dozen to 10 barns that all were in pretty rough shape. So the challenges, old age, is important. Most of these barns are over 100 years old now. Weather and time have taken a toll on them. And modern farming needs have changed, I think, a lot. Our old barns were once suitable to raise livestock, but now we see, there's housing for poultry, for swine, for dairy cattle. It's, a lot more, I think, the housing that they've moved into is a lot better for welfare and for disease control. And so the old barns, will still see some beef cattle, horses in them. But the other species, I think, have all moved away from using old barns. Urban sprawl, as in my own, in my own case, is a pretty severe problem. The cities grow, particularly in that Greater Toronto area. The developers purchase the farmlands, and then the barns are left empty, and then they quickly fall into disrepair. you know, and then as subdivisions get closer to where, you know, barns still may be standing, they're just, usually the developers will just tear them down and rather than trying to integrate them into any new developments. Repair costs are, you know, challenging for barn owners to, you know, to keep them up or repair them. There's a lack of funding for repairs. And there's a lack of recognition of the heritage value of these barns, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in the next I think in the next slide. And then finally, converting barns is a great way to repurpose them. And I've got some pictures here of, you know, barns that have been converted into houses and into event spaces. But it's not a small task to convert a barn. They're large structures that can be costly to upgrade so that they meet municipal regulations and rules and without a lot of, you know, costly and significant interventions in them. So, you know, the challenges are not getting easier for barns. So I think it's an important question to, you know, why do we want to save old barns? And, you know, I think that, you know, first of all, they are a significant part of our rural Ontario history. I think they're also, you know, are usually considered attractive and the highlight of a country drive. I know that when I go out for a drive in a rural area, I'm usually looking at the crops, you know, if it's spring, summer, or fall, and the barns. You know, that those are the things that catch my attention. But I think, you know, perhaps the most important reason to save old barns is that I think that each barn tells a story that's important to our rural history in Ontario. And I think we need to capture and record those stories for future generations. Most people in Ontario today have no connection to agriculture or rural life. And I think barns can help build that connection to agriculture and the food that comes from them. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about three, I guess, case studies of barns that have been saved or preserved or in the midst of it. So on this slide, I've got a picture of a very unique barn that's located in northern Ontario, and it's a 12-sided barn. So it's on just outside of Thessalon and on the way to Iron Bridge up by Sault Ste. Marie. There's only 3 12-sided barns in all of Canada, and this is the only one in Ontario. And it was built in 1919. And this is a good news story in that it was a few years ago, it was empty and not being used. And a group of volunteers up in that area decided that they would move and restore the barn, and they put it it's located in a park up in that area now. And it's actually been repurposed so that it's a community event space. And so there's some businesses that operate in there, and they also hold a Saturday farmers market in that barn during the summer. So I think that's, you know, there's, I guess, a good example of how a barn can be repurposed. Now, a couple other barns that maybe aren't quite as good news, but I'll start with the barn on the left. So this is the DL barn, and it's believed to be the oldest standing barn in Ontario. It was built in 1809 by a Mennonite immigrant from Pennsylvania named Johann Schmidt. And then it was purchased by a Scottish immigrant named DL in 1828. And the farm and the barn where the DL family they were on that property up until the 1950s. The barn now is on the property of Black Creek Pioneer Village. I don't know if anybody on the call tonight has been to that, but it's right on the north edge of Toronto, right on Steeles Avenue at Jane Street. And Black Creek Pioneer Village is under the management of the Toronto Region Conservation Authority. And it's quite unfortunate, but where this DL barn is, and there's some other buildings there too, another barn and a house, they haven't been open to the public, that area, for over 20 years now. And so the barn has fallen into some disrepair. It is designated as a heritage barn, but they've had difficulties getting local governments, so that'd be the city of Toronto, the city of Vaughan, and the Toronto Region Conservation. They're not funding repairs or long-term upkeep of that barn. The OBP got involved about a few months ago before Christmas, and there's a group of people that are attempting to get funding for repairs and a long-term commitment to support the barn. And the city of Toronto in their last budget, did designate some money to Black Creek Pioneer Village, and hopefully that'll go into some repairs. But I think the big question around this barn is and the city has asked this as well. So what's going to be the long-term vision for funding of the barn, and what are they going to do with it? If it's not open to the public, what's going to be, how's it going to be utilized and be financially viable, I guess. So that's the DL barn. The barn on the right is the kid barn. So this barn is located just south of Guelph, in what used to be called Pushlinch Township, but it's now in the city of Guelph. And I probably drove by this barn hundreds of times as I was going down to the 401 out of Guelph. But the OBP was contacted earlier this year, I think it was late January, by the Heritage Planning Services for the city of Guelph. And they were going through the process of designating this as a heritage barn. And this barn was built in about 1842 by a fellow named James Kidd. He was a stonemason, and this barn is what's called a slotted stone barn. And you can see this. I apologize for the picture here, but you can see how they built these long vertical slots in the stones, and that was for ventilation to the inside of the barn. This barn is in pretty bad disrepair. You can't see it again here, but one of the walls is really crumbled down. The barn is owned by Mattamy Homes, so it's owned by a developer. And of course, they would rather tear it down than do anything with it. So I think it raises some questions as to, what's going to happen. It gets a heritage designation, but, unless there's some funding to repair it or, do something with it, integrate it into the new residential development that they're doing in that area, what's going to happen with it. So so just quickly go over now your old barn study. And so again, this was we're doing a census of barns in Ontario. It was developed with the University of Guelph History Department. The information is to be inputted by the barn owner using a web-based tool, and it's completed on your laptop, or you can do it on a cell phone. It's important to point out that all personal information is confidential. It's password protected format on the University of Guelph servers, and it's under the Ontario privacy standards as far as personal information. There's no mandatory questions, but we would like to at least have the barn owner's name and contact information and location of the barn. If we can get those, I think it's important to have that. So I won't spend too much time, but talking about from an objective standpoint, I think there's all kinds of research opportunities into the historical significance of barns. I think maybe the one thing that I've noticed already is that by presenting information from the database, we hope that we can heighten the awareness of an interest in old barns and their preservation. And I can see that already, we haven't presented any of the data out of it yet, but even just talking about it, I think is creating interest. And then we should have the ability to recreate these barns digitally, and I think we could possibly even have virtual barn tours with it. And just quickly mention the picture, the barn raising picture here, and I think this points out the importance of social importance of old barns. These barn raisings were not only social events, but they were also part of the labor exchange amongst rural farmers. And one of the other courses I did at Guelph, I transcribed a diary for a Scottish farmer that came over in about 1860, just north of Fergus, north of Guelph, Ontario. And I looked over his diary for about 30 or 40 years. And over an 8-year period from 1885 to 1892, he went to 20 barn raisings in that area near Fergus. So quickly, the information that we're trying to collect, we want the barn owner's name and address, whether that's historical, lot concession township, or GPS or mailbox. We'd like to have somewhere where we know where the barn is. We'd like to know what year the barn was built in. And if you don't know the actual date, then we're asking people to estimate if they can, in ranges of 50 years. We want to know the barn construction. So is it heavy timber frame? Is it stone? Or is it, the light board frame? We're looking for measurements of the barns. And so we want to know if, the length, the width, the wall height, the basement height. And, there are laser measuring apps on phones now. So we're not asking people to, you don't necessarily have to get out there with measuring tape, and we don't want people going up ladders to do the wall height. But, if we can get those measurements, that would be great. We're asking people to look at the physical condition of the barn, and we've provided this chart that they can use to check off below this the condition of the roof, walls, floors, the foundation, the wood structural members. We want to look at the roof shape. And again, the most common are the gables and the gambrels, but I've been looking at some of the data that we've got. We have about 100 barns in the data set now, and we actually have a monitor roof barn, and we have one round barn from near Caledon, Ontario, that's in there. We want photos of the barns, so we want photos of the outside from different angles, the side of the barn and the ends of the barn. We want photos of the inside of the barn. If we can get a picture of the bent, we would really like to have that in the underside of the roof. We'd like a picture of the threshing floor. So the threshing floor is where usually between two bents, and where the barn doors open up onto the threshing floor. And this looks like it was just as an aside, this looks like a swing beam barn here as well. We want a picture of mortise and tenon if we can get it. So this is how they actually hold the posts and the beams together. The mortise is the hole, and then the tenon is the wet wooden peg that was driven in there to hold it together. And then we have a section where we're asking the barn owner to go and look at the barn, and there's a bunch of special features on the barn that they can just check off. And there's about 70 special features that we've got pictures of and definitions of. And so these special features can be on the roof, they can be on the outside of the barn, they can be in the mow area, the inside of the upstairs of the barn. They could be in the basement or stable. And so I've just thrown in some pictures of a few different features. The cupola here on the top, owl hole, which I'm not, I know my father would probably roll over in his grave to think that he had an owl hole, because probably the first thing that would go through there is a pigeon, and he did not like pigeons in the upstairs of the barn. Hay hood and a hay door. And then if you're lucky, you might see carved dates on a post or a beam in the barn. That'd give you a pretty good idea what year it was built. Hay fork and trolley along the top. And my uncle's barn had this in it and had the ropes still hanging from it. And then I threw in a manure litter carrier because I vaguely remember this from my father's first barn. And so it's pretty archaic compared to the manure management that modern dairy barns would have now. We're looking for a description of the barn complex. So what's been added to the barn? And that could be another barn, a milk house, a silo, shed, and one of the things. So this is my grandfather's barn again, and I think somebody had a plane in the 1950s and must have gone around and taken aerial pictures of barns. So this is a great way to get a description of the barn complex, because you can see all the different parts that have been added to it. We'd like to know what is the current use of the barn? Is there still livestock in there? Is it empty? Is it being used for storage? Has it been converted into a business such as a winery? We have a small section where you can put a barn story in, and so that could be, a memory about the barn, some history about the barn, or a fun fact about the barn. And then you can add also up to about, I think it's 4 historical photos you can put in there as well of the barn. And then I put my father's one barn in, and I actually did a schematic of the stable. And so you can see I sketched in where the cows' stalls were and the different pens that were in the barn. So if you want to do that, you can add that in as well. And that was the end of your old barn study. So this is the last slide. And so, I think I should point out that OBP membership, I think, is it's not costly. It's only $35 for a 1-year membership. There's I think some pretty good benefit out of that. I mean, I've listed some of them here, but you're going to be able to get access to the first data that comes out of your old barn study. I talked about the Google Groups, chat room, the tenant talks. We have a newsletter that comes out monthly. We're going to have events and all of the resources. But I think at the end of the day, I'd add that I think the biggest benefit of membership is adding your voice to the OBP and our goal of saving barns. And I think that there is power in numbers, and having an organization with a large membership gets you a greater standing and voice with governments and other stakeholders, and thus the ability to influence them. So I think that, you know, the more people that join OBP, the more that we're going to be able to do in saving barns. And I think that's it. So questions?
Does anybody have questions of Brandy? I think we had someone had their hand up. Jen, can you see?
Jenny had her hand up.
Jenny, right.
Randy, a comment from Stephen Nicholson. I'm glad to
Yes.
see you virtually. I'm glad you've moved from Western Ontario to Eastern Ontario. I joined the OBP years ago, but it was mostly Western people, so I only paid $35, and I just I'm a voyeur once in a while. I look at what's going on, but I would dearly like to see something happen in Eastern Ontario. Gary, in the countryside region of Kingston, you have dozens of barns that are decrepit, and I know a couple of people that know what I did with the barn, and they've asked me to take their barns down. It's a bit beyond my capability by myself. I have some friends in Michigan. I spent a lot of time there, and actually the Michigan Department of Agriculture and some other group, they put money together so to preserve your barns. So you go there and it's all soybeans and corn, same as around here, but the barns are still there. They don't bulldoze them over, so they maintain those. And if you want to take down an old barn in Michigan, you have to prove that it's not salvageable. So some owners, they just let it, you know, run down until they say, well, it's too late. But there's a pretty good group of people there that watch that doesn't happen. And there's grants, and I'm not sure how much is available, but I know it's kind of a big part of the landscape. When you drive through central Michigan, and there's dozens and dozens of old, not restored, but maintained old dairy barns, you know, and it's nice to see on the landscape. And to me, I guess as a farm background, that to me is as important as like maintaining Barryfield. Personally, I mean, it's, you know, it's a heritage. It's a part of our background. I'm a little disappointed we don't do more in Ontario for that, but I'm pleased to be part of this tonight. So thank you for Randy for your comments. I didn't know you were the other Jersey farmer. I grew up on Dufferin, not grew up, I spent 10, 12 years on Dufferin Street near another Jersey farm, which ended up being Southbrook Wineries. So I know the area that you're from and all those crossroads very well. And there used to be lots of nice barns. There's lots of big homes there now. So anyway, thank you for the information.
I actually did veterinary work for Dawn Head Farms.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I just lived up Dufferin Street, so we used to go there and buy our vegetables and stuff.
Yeah.
So we spent 12 years living there. And finally I smartened up and moved to Kingston. So
So maybe I'll, so just, could I say, Stephen, so one of the things is that I think good news for Eastern Ontario, we have 2 new regional representatives that I think are going to be quite helpful. They're up, one's near just outside Ottawa, I think, and the other one's near Perth. But you know, they just joined, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 months ago. So I intend to try and talk to them and see what we can do to, I think, you know, maybe do a barn tour in this summer, but I think also help. One of the things that I found is that people are looking for construction people that'll work on barns, and I really haven't had many contacts for that. And so I think they're both involved in heritage work and stuff like that, so they know a lot more people in that area. So I think they're going to help with that as well. So
it's difficult because few people can afford to put the money into maintaining to convert or purchase an old barn and repurpose it or just restore it. And a lot of my experience, a lot of property owners have a pretty inflated value of that building is worth. And so they want a fortune if you want to buy it, and go, no, you have no idea what it costs to take that down and move it and repurpose it. So no, I'm not going to, you know, give you a small fortune just to buy a ton of work, you know.
Yeah, thank you,
So
Stephen. We've got a
decline.
raised hand
Yep.
by the counselor here, Gary, who's Troth.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just thanks very much, Randy, for that amazing presentation. It's quite inspirational, really, and I'm so glad you're in this area, and that we can, you know, perhaps build more and more awareness all the time. That there are a lot. Eastern Ontario is quite a different culture or whatever than Western Ontario, and I'm sure you appreciate that. There's a lot of uniqueness to our area, and so I think that though you know, it's a labor of love for many, and I always was very proud when I see people put their money in and value the farms, and everything that you spoke of, being a dairy farmer's son, resonated with me very, very strongly. And I'm going to send a membership in. I just want to know, I'd love to be part of barn tours. And I know that in the countryside area of Kingston, there are a considerable number of barns, and you know, it would be great to find ways to inspire people to love to learn more about that, to care for that investment, and to you know, value the heritage components, and so many points that you made. So thank you for that, and I look forward to hearing more and learning more, and yeah, bringing voice as well alongside with you and everyone here. Thank you.
And we have another raised hand here, Sharon DeLine. I think you need to unmute yourself, Sharon.
There we go. Thank you. There are other ways to immortalize barns, and I was wondering if you had ever thought about trying to collect photos from volunteered from family albums of barns that have existed in better times, and from an accumulation of those, say from Eastern Ontario, from say Hastings, Central Frontenac, and so on. The thing is, you could actually make a documentary film from that sort of thing, and I think that it might inspire. It might inspire, because I do know of an old log barn that has fallen into disrepair. But the thing is that it's I mean, even a picture of it taken today in comparison to a picture of it, say, in yesteryear in the 1950s, would serve as a heritage moment. It would serve as a heritage moment. Okay, thank you. And thank you for this. This is lovely. Thank you.
So, well, and Sharon, so one of the things that we are doing with Your Old Barn Study is, it's not just existing barns. You know, if you have enough pictures and memories of a barn, like, we welcome people to put those into Your Old Barn Study too. And so what my brother and I have, we sat down one day and we actually put my father's two barns into the you know, into the database. And what, you know, it was, we had pictures and we kind of had memories of what things were looked like. I mean, we don't have obviously all the measurements and all that kind of stuff, but I think if, you know, if there's people that have photos and have enough memories, you know, please put those barns in as well, and stories. So
yeah, because the thing is that you can make, it's as I said, you know, you could make really lovely coffee table books, or if people didn't want to go the book route, videos, you know, or some sort of memory on their phones or whatever they use. You know, it's just, but anyway, this has been lovely. Thank you so much.
It's Brenda Martin. I haven't no raised hand. I've been trying to do so. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi,
yes,
Brenda, go ahead.
All right. So in 2019, North Frontenac Historical Society, which I am the president, we did a huge book called Memories of the Farm. It represents as pictures and stories and memories of every barn in North Frontenac from early times. We didn't have all those categories that Randy outlined there, but we sure have a lot of them covered. And that book originally was going to be called barns, old barns. But what happened, it was a pandemic period and we were doing all the interviews outside. So we were doing all the pictures and everything. And then the people started and the grandchildren with their memories. And so the book is called Memories of the Farm. I'm delivering a copy to Shirley Bailey tomorrow, and I sure wish Randy had one to look at one. Because the pictures are very much like what you're showing there tonight. And you are, the OBS is recorded in the very front of our book, because you were just being founded in 2019, and we made reference to it and asked people with any old barns to be in contact with you if possible. So I would love to have you have a look at that book, and we're very proud of it.
No, I would love to see that and figure out how we could get some of that into our database.
Our big issue about barn tours was liability. We do a bus tour, a historic bus tour every year, but we go into community-owned buildings, like township-owned buildings, and therefore we're covered. But on other sites, it's a little tricky.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Brenda. I'm glad you were able
Thank
to
you.
join the Zoom meeting tonight, and I look forward to seeing that book. And if you've got a second one, please bring it along. I'll make sure that Randy gets it.
I will be glad to give it to them. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks very
Brenda.
much. We have
I
another
see-
question from Mark Sagan. Is the old barn study data available to the general public? It was a bit hard to tell, Randy, where it stands.
So anybody can go in and look at it. So you just go into the Ontario Barn Preservation website, and there's a link there that'll take you into your old barn study, but it's just the survey part. So the data, we're just starting to work on it now. So it's kind of a messy data set. And we're going to be working with the University of Guelph this summer and trying to summarize some of that data and be able to present some of it. And I think we're probably going to present the data, the information we get out of it, to the members first, because, as a member benefit. But eventually, I kind of see this, that eventually we're going to have students that are going to write, articles and publications that are going to become available to the general public. So, there is, it's hard to, it might be hard to imagine, but there's the survey itself, which is in one form, and then the data has to be looked after separate from that.
That's great. Thank you. We have another question. Someone, Kim Pierce, is asking whether a transcript of this presentation will be available. The idea with this is that we will maybe edit the video a bit, and it'll go on the Frontenac Heritage Foundation YouTube channel. So Kim, if it's very easy to just Google YouTube Frontenac Heritage Foundation, it won't go up tomorrow, but we'll try to get it up as quickly as we can. So then it's open to available to the public. And I see another raised hand, Betty Lee Daigle.
Yes, hello. I just moved back to the Kingston area, to Mallory Town, and we've only lived here for about a year and a half. And we have a barn on our property, and a branch went through the metal roof. So we've been trying to find people to even look at our barn. And I just wanted to know if the OB, the organization, can give us recommendations of people that will even look at our barn. Someone mentioned that, there was a Mennonite community, and we're just trying to find people because I'm originally from Kingston, but I have left for 45 years and just come back.
Yeah, I think like personally, Betty, I don't know of barn contractors or barn repair people, but the two regional reps, I think they have some connections. So if you went on the OBP website, or if you want to send me an email later, I can get you in contact with them. But if you go to the website and you look for the regional reps that are in Eastern Ontario, you could contact one of them or send the OBP an email and they put you in contact with them. But if not, just let me know. And I'll see if we can help you.
Thank you. I'm just appreciate that you had put it in
Yeah.
the libraries to know about this, because I just happened to be in the library when I saw the flyer. So thank you.
Sharon, did you have another question or?
Yes, I did. Um, when Brenda was speaking about this book, I just wondered where one could get a copy of it.
Well,
Brenda,
Brent,
Well,
Brenda?
the inventory presently is in my home. So I have copies. I can almost reach them from my office here. How would I get it to you? Are you Kingston area?
Yes, I am. Now, you're coming in tomorrow, and tomorrow I have a number of things to do, including going and
Well,
picking up my car.
I'll leave it with Shirley.
Yes.
Okay.
And how about Councillor Oosterhoff? Would you like a copy too, Councillor? I thought you might.
Okay, and so maybe you could just let Shirley know how much the cost will be, and I'll
Well,
leave the money with
we
her.
sell it for $80 because it's 300 pages, almost like beautiful pictures and things.
Okay.
And you'll be sending a e-transfer or email or whatever, or a check or whatever.
Okay,
We are very trusting.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you very much. And Randy, I have to say that you are the inspiration behind this too. So thank you.
Yes,
Thank you
indeed.
both.
Okay, do we have any other questions tonight? Are we wrapped up? If that's the case, then I will ask Christine Bear to say thank you to Randy for his delightful talk.
Well, I'd like to thank Randy on behalf of the board and members of the Frontenac Heritage Foundation for his presentation on saving Eastern Ontario barns. It was really fascinating. I've always had an affinity for barns, and it's really interesting to see the variety of types and configurations that are existing, especially across Ontario. I will hold up this lovely plaque. I probably can't see it, but anyways, Shirley will have it and we'll make sure it gets to you. I did have a question for you. I was wondering about the wood used in the various barns. Was it basically whatever was handy to the area where they were constructing the barns, or were there specific requirements that were used? I'm assuming everything was hardwood, but that may not be the case.
Yeah, I'm not the expert on that, but what I think what they used, what was local, I think was mostly what happened. So I think there's some variation across the province.
Okay. Anyways, thanks again, and
Okay.
and I think everyone was very interested, and certainly the book by North Frontenac is something that we probably all will want to get. Shirley?
All right, thank you very much, everybody, for coming out. I'll talk to the library and see if they might be interested in putting one in as part of their collection, because that way people would have access to it. But thanks everyone for coming. It's been a great evening.
Thank
you for listening to me.
Everything.
Take care, Randy.
Take care,
Thank you all.
everybody.
Have a good
Thank you.
Easter.
Okay. Night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.